Happy Christmas to you all. We restart with our comments and analysis. Foreign Minister Lavrov answered these days a question from Senator Vasily Konnikov, head of the Friendship Group in the Federal Assembly of Russia, Friendship Group with Bulgaria, related to his proposal to use the Kamchat tourist complex in Bulgaria and switch ownership from the Moscow City Hall to the federal government. The answer caused tectonics in Bulgaria. It is often the case where the media report the news, but they fail to provide the audience with the context and the story behind, or analyze the consequences. The Bulgarian public was largely left on its own to navigate between the full spectrum of reactions, from the horror scream to nothing special soundbite. Most of the political news related to Russia, unfortunately, begin and end with their PR dimension oscillating between the emotional extremes. Mr. Lavrov knows this and is using it. To begin with, Senator Konnikov, who is a representative of the Communist Party of Russian Federation, does not improvise in asking the foreign minister on what the reaction of the government would be. Not only he's overseeing the relations with Bulgaria in the higher chamber of the Federal Assembly, but before he has voiced this initiative and he's made it public, he in all likelihood he has coordinated it with the different institutions in Russia, starting from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs to Kremlin, Security Council, and all the interested parties. Only then he has made it public, and he has invited, and Mr. Lavrov has decided to speak out. In any case, the Russian foreign minister deliberately makes a calculated move that aims to cause a storm in Bulgaria and put it into a tailspin of soul-searching and mutual incriminations between pro- and anti-Russian circles. This is the usual plan, trying to exploit and expose sensitive vulnerabilities in the Bulgarian society each and every time when it comes to a minimum consensus needed on how to deal with Russia. Furthermore, Foreign Minister Lavrov is directly speaking to NATO and the EU, denigrating the added value of Bulgaria as a member state, demonstrating Russia's unlimited resource base here. Lavrov's political prose belongs to the same doctrinal matrix of the infamous Trojan horse epithet used by Ambassador Chizhov. This is the Russian ambassador to the EU, that he used 12 years ago describing Bulgaria as a country with a level of dependency from Russia. Moscow parades Bulgaria's dominance, the dominance of Bulgarian politics and politicians, reminding each one of them the limitations of their freedom of action and continuous dependencies. One more example of this imperial hubris, Putin's quotes made public these days by the leader of the Bulgarian Russophiles, Nikolai Malinov. The Russian president warned the Bulgarian authorities not to take on Malinov because he is Kremlin's man. Neither the Bulgarian president, nor the prime minister, nor the foreign minister, nor the general prosecutor dared to resort even to the humblest of reaction of the type Bulgaria and its justice system cannot and will not be influenced by political statements by foreign leaders. Safe, but they did not utter a word. Instead, they opted to remain silent and keep mute to this day, humiliated, suppressed, and obviously exhibiting an inferiority complex. Sergey Lavrov's statement is more of a political declaration than a pragmatic act seeking to accomplish a specific goal of turning the Kamchatka complex into an EU center for Russian soft power. He is in effect promoting the so-called humanitarian dimension of Russia's hybrid warfare against NATO and the EU. The sheer fact of referring to the need to set up a humanitarian center implies that Bulgaria is a humanitarian case. Lavrov also points to the commitment by Russia to use humanitarian channels to influence events in the Balkans and the Black Sea region. One can only wonder whether it is the right time to promote the compassionate nature of Russia's foreign policy against the background of massive airstrikes of Russian planes in Syria, taking a heavy death toll on civilians and generating hordes of immigrants. Lavrov is, of course, mindful of this fact, yet he chooses to deliver the same line with persistent line with the humanitarian center as the embodiment of Russia's omnipotence and soft power. The humanitarian center analogues that we have seen in Niš in Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina offer fresh evidence of the discrepancy between the generosity and compassion that humanitarian aid implies and the aggressive nature in content when using humanitarian verbiage to promote Russian strategic interest. The sense of fervor that transcends Lavrov's comment reaches new heights with the revelation that the fate of the tourist complex in Kamchatka would be decided at the highest level in the country and on national grounds at the Security Council of the Russian Federation, involving President Putin and a decision of this council. Such an elevation in priorities will shift the focus from the trade, economic, and cultural and educational dimensions of the deal to the strategic and military value of the resort complex. Let's briefly recall the background to the story. The idea of a dedicated tourist complex emerged almost 20 years ago when members of the then former Communist Party elite tried to convince and secure the support of former mayor of Moscow, Yuri Loshkov. At the start, things looked quite bright and innocent because Russia did not have access to Crimea, and it was short of tourist camps to accommodate children in summer. It seemed at the same time that the Kamchatka complex could become a prime recreational base for kids from Moscow schools as part of the mayor's social programs and the budget of the Russian capital. As the Bulgarian partners in the project had neither the resources nor the ability to turn it to a successful business-run project, they kept hammering on the line that it should serve explicitly the needs of Russian kids, and therefore it should be budgeted from Russia's capital. However, the end result deviated from the original concept, and later it became a high-class accommodation with some amenities which are atypical for a kid resort, including congressional tourism facilities. Moscow's budget money were essential to keep the operations afloat, and as the long-term revenue base was compromised. So the strategic dimensions or military dimensions that we witness today were a remote possibility. Few people even bothered to consider them in line with the tense relations between Yuri Loshkov and the Kremlin. Even when the agreement on the complex was signed in September 2008 by the then social minister in the government of the tripartite coalition, Emilia Maslarova, it became crystal clear that this is a high political risk project in a permanent and dire need of a massive flow of subsidies from the Moscow budget. The growing political risk of the project being dependent on Mayor Blushkov remaining on top in the Moscow City Hall meant one thing. At the moment Kremlin replaces Blushkov, the Kamchatka would enter into a terminal existential down spiral. The crisis period in the operation of the Kamchatka complex directly relates to the time after September 2010, when Lushkov was fired due to loss of trust in him by the then President Medvedev. The most acute phase in the crisis hit in 2015 after the annexation of Crimea and the demise of the South Stream project. Subsidies from the federal and Moscow's budget drastically changed course, and more were rerouted to serve the development of the tourism in the Crimea Peninsula, and particularly tourism for kids. About $6 billion a year amounted the subsidies Russia spent in Crimea, and the Moscow city budget played an instrumental role. Just a year after he was removed from the mayor's office, Yuri Lushkov sought asylum in another country and declared himself politically repressed. The new mayor-elect in 2013, Sergey Sobyanin, shut down most of Lushkov's ideas and projects, and the Kamchatka complex topped the list. The attempt to find an alternative use and alternative owner came to a logical end. Federal funds to save the complex from bankruptcy and retain ownership for the Russian state. Foreign Minister Lavrov's soft powers talk and interlude, and the idea to infuse federal funds on national security grounds will invite a decision by the Security Council, which is, at this moment, seems inevitable. But there is little doubt it will be taken if it's included in the agenda of one of the forthcoming meetings. Bulgaria can hardly hope to control the verbal extremes of Russian politicians. It can, however, be in charge of its own actions that will make Kremlin's free ride on Bulgarian territory impossible. And this is the first part, and I will follow on with the second on this analysis. Thank you very much.